First of all, I'd like to thank Professor Triggs. Where's she disappeared to? Oh, here. Come back up here. We have a delicious plate of baklava.
Goodness me. That's fantastic.
And a bottle of booze.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Triggs, for your insightful words about the current Australian democracy, and in particular, the role of the courts, the legislature, and rights in this country as it stands today. This afternoon, I was at work, as some of us are, and I spent some time on Facebook. And I was just strolling around to see who's popular and what's important, and I saw that the Julian Triggs Appreciation Society had more than 16,000 likes. The Julian Triggs for Australian of the Year page on Facebook had more than 15,000 likes. And I encourage you all to join and like, because Julian Triggs ought to be the Australian of the Year, and I'm saying that now. Google it, it's easy. Peter Dutton only had 10,000 likes. Tony Abbott for worst Prime Minister in the history of Australia had 206,000 likes. Only just surpassing the demented video of Clive Palmer today about Bronwyn Bishop at 130,000 views. Leslie said less of the things I wanted to say, so I'm going to cut to the point. You talked about the common law principles and rights and the Australian court's role in protecting those rights. And no doubt over the last decade or two, those principles have become more elucidated, particularly since the Chief Justice, former Chief Justice Spiegelman, had such an influential role in that. And we've seen them eroded in important ways. We've seen Alcatab, we've seen a series of important decisions which we've seen the legislature explicitly or directly, implicitly overturning important rights. Earlier this year we saw S297, which was averted to earlier, which was a gap in the clouds perhaps for many of us to see that, contrary to most well understood principles of administrative law, the High Court of Australia ordered the minister to grant a protection visa in most extraordinary circumstances, and God, it was satisfying. You talked about citizenship and social cohesion. It's an important thing. Obviously, this is a major issue. Last night, Hannah Ryan, who's sick tonight, organised an important and fantastic speech, a panel about citizenship stripping. And it brought to bear many different views on the issue. One of the basal considerations that came from it was what it meant to be Australian and whether or not that was a thing that we can prescribe, a thing that ought to be prescribed, or a thing that is merely, in Brett Walker's terms, an observational description. Whether it ought to be a normative thing or just an observational description of what it is to be Australian. I personally think, and I think many people in this room would agree, it ought to be a thing of observational description only. And on that point about what it means to be Australian, I'd like to take us on a reflection which talks to this about our immigration policy. Now, we all know that Professor Triggs was herself a boat person and came to this country by boat in the same year that we passed the Migration Act, our favoured Migration Act. I'm not sure if she now qualifies as an unauthorised maritime arrival for the purposes of Section 5AA of the Migration Act, but that's a point for later on. Early the year after 1958, Robert Menzies, Prime Minister at the time, put out a quite extraordinary statement about Australia's migration policy, and I'm going to read to you from it. Robert Menzies said in his statement, he says, It is our national desire to develop Australia a homogeneous population in order that we may avert social difficulties which have arisen in many other countries. It is clearly the right of any nation to determine its own racial constitution. Later on he continued and he said, "The point I want to make is that our immigration policy was not devised as something with particular application to any one country. It is broadly devised, of long standing, and non-discriminatory as between one country possessing non-European citizens and another." The basic point is that if you're not European, we're not discriminating between you. It's just, as between you and Europeans, I thought that, we might have come some distance in the last 57 years, but we haven't, because I'm going to read you a policy statement. It's the Liberal Party from the 2013, and I'd just like to draw a couple of things from it. It says, "The coalition will put the national interest first, deliver strong borders, provide a world-class defence force to protect the nation's interests overseas. We will take immediate action to protect the integrity of our borders and Australia's immigration program. We will not allow boat arrivals and people smugglers to either determine Australia's immigration program or undermine the Australian people's confidence in the program. We will deliver strong borders. The boats are stopped with tough and proven measures." Now, there are many similar things which underlie both these policies, but the language has become more militaristic and more aggressive, and I have scribbled out on my page saying that we haven't gone further. In fact, I think we might have gone backwards since 1959. I'll leave you with those nice thoughts and move on to the next point. Professor Triggs, you've played a pivotal role in the last couple of years in the Australian, well, I don't know if I call you the public service, but I would call you the public service for my purposes, in standing up for what has been the correct position in face of incredible pressure from a number of different sources, parliamentary, media, and otherwise. And there has to be said something about your grace under pressure, because the frank and fearless advice of public servants, it may not always be welcomed by politicians, but it is a fundamental fabric in the blanket of Australian democracy, and we thank you very much for coming.